Shabbat Shalom, Body of Messiah. Mark Pulley here with YHWH'S Assembly in Fort Myers, Florida, bringing you another teaching from Yah's laws and commandments. Wherever you are, I want to thank you for tuning in. I also pray that your week was a blessing. I pray for the future week, that it'll be a week full of peace, a week full of ease, a week full of Yah's blessing upon your life as we continue to learn together and grow and increase and multiply in our knowledge and understanding of Yah's laws and commandments. I want to thank you for tuning in. I just pray that our ministry, our teachings, are a blessing to you. I pray that you are learning, you are growing. I pray that Yah's presence is abounding in all of our lives as we celebrate His Shabbat, which is a feast day. And just to remind us, when he talks about in Leviticus 23 about the feasts of Yah, they are Moedim. That's the Hebrew word for appointed times. They are set apart times, preordained times by Yah, that he would meet physically with his people. Now, something that always blesses me when I think of it, and that is in the Garden of Eden. Yah physically was in the garden with Adam and Eve. They had no understanding of evil. They had no dealings with darkness until Hasatan came and tempted Eve. But we see here a picture that Yah's presence, his physical presence, was with them. And when we read about that Yah came down in the cool of the day and walked with them and called them, we see and understand, or at least my perception of it, is that on a regular basis, in the cool of the day, which would be towards evening, that Yah had a set apart time to come and physically be with Adam and Eve. And that also gives me a prophetic view of what Yah's plan is for your life and my life as we obey His commandments and keep His feasts, that He wants to dwell with us. We also know, and it's also a prophetic picture of what the afterlife will be like, that it says that Yah will tabernacle with us. And so that is something we can look forward to. Now, today, I want to talk about something that I just freshly learned and seen. You know, you can see things through your intellect and it just doesn't do anything. But when Yah emphasizes something and is teaching you about something, then it really is amplified to you. And so what I want to talk to you about is the 7th day of Nisan, which is the feast of first fruits. So let's just go over some foundational scriptures in Leviticus 23. Leviticus 23. verse 2, Yah says, "Speak to the sons of Israel, and you shall say to them, the set feasts of Yah, which you proclaim as holy or set apart gatherings." These also, the Moedim also means rehearsals. You are rehearsing something that's going to take place in the spiritual and in the future. You are rehearsing it on earth as if it has already taken place. So then he says, "These are my appointed times." These are the set times in which Yah has planned to be with his people. He wants to be with them physically, not just spiritually, but he wants to manifest his presence. Now, this morning I woke up thinking about experiencing the fullness of his presence. I would encourage you to write that down, that you would pray that you would experience the fullness of his presence, yes, on his feasts, which include the Shabbat, which also includes the 7 feasts of Yah, but also on a daily basis. So then he goes into talking about the appointed times, and he says, in the first month, on the 14th of the month, underline that, between the evenings is the Passover to Yah. On the 15th day of this month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we see the 14th is the Passover, and this all begins at sundown. So at sundown on the 14th to sundown on the 15th is the Passover, or the preparation day for unleavened bread. That's what it is referred to in the renewed covenant. And then it says on the 15th day, so at sundown on the 15th day to sundown on the 16th day is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then it says, on the first day you shall have a holy gathering, you shall do no work, so it's a Shabbat. Drop down to verse 10. Speak to the sons of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you come into the land which I am going to give you, and have reaped its harvest, and have brought in the Omar of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, then he shall wave the Omar before Yah for your acceptance. For your acceptance. On the morrow of the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. So we see here that on the 14th day is the Passover, and we can confirm this if you just go to the left to Exodus chapter 12, and we see in verse 2, and this month shall be the head of months for you, and it shall be the first of the months of the year for you. Speak to the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of the month, they shall each take for themselves an animal of the flock for a father's house, a flock for a house. Now drop down to verse 16. And it shall be for you to keep until the 14th day of this month. So for 4 days they were to keep this animal in preparation for Passover. Okay? And it shall be to you until the 14th day, and all the assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it between the evenings. All right? And it says here on the 14th day, and how Israel determined days were by the moon. The new moon started the first day of the new month. All right? So we see here that on the 14th day was to be the Passover. All right? Then if you look in verse 18, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread. So in the evening starts unleavened bread. So we see here that, and we're talking about the 17th day of Nisan. Now, there are some things, that didn't really say a whole lot to me when I came to Torah and began to learn about the feast days. Okay, the 17th day, all right, that's just, the 14th is the Passover, unleavened bread is the 15th day, and the next day, concerning Yeshua's death, burial, and resurrection, was just a regular Shabbat. And then the next day, the 17th, we find he was resurrected on the 17th day of Nisan. So, what does this all mean? All right, now here's some interesting things that I found that the scriptures talk about on the 17th day of Nisan that I never saw before, even though I'm sure you've read it just like I read it over and over again. Now, let's turn to Genesis chapter 8. And we just want to look at some of the things that the scriptures say took place on the 17th of Nisan. And when you see that, I just believe it will be a blessing. It will be more information, more understanding concerning the 17th day of Nisan. And all these things are not just coincidental. All right, in Genesis chapter 8, verse 4, it says, in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. I believe that's how you say that. A-R-A-R-A-T. Today, I'm reading out of my Hebraic Roots Bible. So we see here that Noah's ark rested on the earth on the 17th day of Nisan. All right? So another interesting fact is when you read in Exodus 12 through Exodus 15 and you study about the Exodus out of Egypt, you will see that, okay, on the 14th day they celebrated Passover. On the 15th day, they began to leave Egypt. And when Israel came through the Red Sea, here we can turn there if you like. Exodus, I believe it's 14. And we see here that in verse 29 of Exodus 14, it says, "And the sons of Israel walked on dry ground in the middle of the sea, the waters being a wall for them from their right and from their left. And Yahweh saved Israel in that day from the hand of Egypt, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And Israel saw the great hand with which Yahweh worked against Egypt, and the people feared Yah, and they believed in Yah and in his servant Moshe." So when you read from Exodus 12 through Exodus 14, you can trace that the day that Israel crossed over the Red Sea was on the 17th day of Nisan. Now, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? To me, it's interesting. Also, one of the things that I believe with Noah resting, the ark comes to rest on the earth, the waters began to descend, and he rested on the top of the mountain. And what that represents, also what Israel being delivered from Egyptian bondage and crossing over the Red Sea on the 17th of Nisan represents. And then when you think of the Messiah was resurrected, and when Miriam and the other ladies came to the tomb early in the morning on the 17th, he was already resurrected. And what that all represents, I believe, or at least in part, that old things are passing away. Now, when you think about Israel being delivered out of Egypt, that old lifestyle passed away, and they had a new lifestyle of a land flowing with milk and honey. When you think of Noah's Ark, that old lifestyle that they experienced where there was lawlessness throughout the land, Yah was beginning afresh with the people that obeyed his laws and commandments, that believed in him. And when you think of Yeshua resurrecting from the grave, and we are giving a new life in Messiah when we live according to his laws and commandments, and when we receive by the Spirit of Yah that born again experience. Anybody can go to an assembly, or anybody can go to a meeting, a fellowship, a church, or whatever you want to call it. That doesn't mean that they are a new creation. What matters and what reveals that a person is a new creation, as Paul said, and old things pass away and all things become new, is whether or not the Spirit of Yah is recreating their human spirit in the likeness and the image of Yah and his son, his Messiah, Yeshua. And so the 17th day of Nisan, yes, it's about the barley harvest. And part of what that speaks to me is that they were to bring their harvest to the priest. And the priest was to lift up that harvest and wave it so that you and I would be accepted. And what that speaks to me in the day in which we live is about tithes and offerings. That when we, Malachi said, when we bring our tithes and offerings to the storehouse, the priest, which we know in the renewed covenant is Yeshua, he will lift it up as you give it to the Father. And he will wave it, and Yah will accept it. We also see that in the book of Proverbs, it says that we are to bring our first fruits, and that's the first income, the first harvest you've received off of your labor. Now, we don't live in an agricultural society. We get paid with money. And just like they did in the Torah, it says that if you couldn't bring, your first fruits because it was just too much to carry, whether it was an animal, whether it was agricultural, it said you could bring your silver or your money, and that would be accepted. And so part of the 17th day of Nisan, or the Feast of First Fruits, it speaks to me about the tithes and offerings. So that's something to think about. Also, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and verse 41, through verse 45, it says, one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, another glory of the stars, for stars differ from star in glory, so also the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, and it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body, and there is a spiritual body. So also it had been written, the first Adam became a living soul, the last Adam a life-giving spirit. Now we know that Yeshua was the first to rise from the dead. We can see that in verse 20 of the same chapter. And now Messiah has been raised from the dead. He became the first fruits of those having fallen asleep. For since through man came death, also through a man, notice a man, not a deity, is the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Messiah all will be made alive. But each in his own order, Messiah the first fruit, afterward those of Messiah at his coming. And to me, the interesting thing in Messiah's resurrection, in the ark landing on the mountain, and the children of Israel crossing over, this all took place on the 17th day of Nisan, the day we celebrate the feast of first fruits. Now, there's one other interesting thing concerning the 17th day of Nisan. Turn to the book of Esther. And the book of Esther in the Hebraic Roots Bible is on page 1041. Book of Esther. Now, we know that the book of Esther is about Haman wanting to annihilate Israel, wanting to annihilate Judah. And his plan was to destroy all of Israel. And the thing that I came to see and understand is when Haman's plot was exposed and turned against him, when did this take place? On the 17th day, you guessed it, of Nisan. Again, referring the old passing away and the new coming forth. You can read Esther chapter 3, and it's beginning, and just read the rest of the book for context. But in verse 12 it says, "Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month." Okay, that's Nisan. So here's the 13th day. All right? And then the plan was to wipe out all of Israel. And when Esther came to understand this, she declared a fast for 3 days. So we see here that on the 13th day of the first month, the king's scribes were called. All right? And then Esther, verse 16, "Go gather all the Jews being found in Shushan and fast for me," because she was going to go in to the king and present her case. And it says, "Do not eat or drink for 3 days." So the fast was on the 14th, 15th, and the 16th day of Nisan. And to me, that's just interesting. And again, nothing's coincidental with Yah. When these things happen on the certain times that they happen, it's his set apart plan. And on the 17th day, the tables were turned on Haman. And Esther went in to the king and presented to share with the king the plan of Haman and how he wanted to wipe out Israel. And look in chapter 7, verse 3, "And Esther, the queen, said, 'If I have found grace in your eyes, O king, and it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request. For we are sold, my people and I, for destruction, for murder, and for perishing. But we have been sold for male slaves and slave girls. I would have kept silent through the adversary, could not make up for the king's loss. And the king answered and said to Esther the queen, who is he, this one? And where is this one who is filled with pride in his heart to do so? And Esther said, a man, an enemy, and a hating one, Haman. This evil one, and Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, rising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood to beg for his life from Esther the queen, and he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. And if you just look in verse 10, and it says, and they hanged Haman on the wooden gallows, which he had prepared for Mordecai. And the king's wrath was ceased. So the king would represent our father. And when our enemy, Hasatan, tries to rise up against us, he will be defeated. And this all took place on the 17th day of Nisan. Coincidence? I don't think so. Coincidence that the Messiah was resurrected on the 17th day of Nisan? I don't think so. Coincidence that the Messiah, was crucified at the evening on Passover on the 14th. Coincidence? I don't think so. Was it a coincidence that the Feast of Unleavened Bread started on the next day? If we look real quickly in Mark chapter 16. Mark chapter 16. And it says that, speaking of the Messiah, having risen and now early on the first of the Sabbaths, he first appeared to Mary Magdalene, from whom he cast out 7 demons. So we see here that the Messiah was resurrected on the first of the Sabbaths, on the first day of first fruits. Some people might call it Resurrection Day. And then from then you start the 7-week count for Shavuot. But to me, when you understand the timeline of the Messiah, that on the 14th day towards sundown, Messiah was crucified on the Passover. And then on Wednesday, that's Tuesday the 14th, sundown, to Wednesday the 15th, sundown, that's when he was crucified. And then 15th sundown to 16th sundown is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then the 16th sundown to the 17th sundown was the Shabbat. And right at the end of that Shabbat, somewhere from evening to evening, Messiah was resurrected. And then that started at sundown on the 17th. That started the feast of the feast of first fruits, excuse me. And so there are a number of things, and these are just the few that I found of what took place on the 17th day of Nisan. So we have some biblical history here of things that took place on Nisan, and they all talk about deliverance. The ark rested on the mount, and Noah and his family were delivered from that storm on the 17th day of Nisan. Israel was delivered from Egyptian bondage on the 17th day of Nisan, and they entered into their new life on the 17th day of Nisan, a new life of abundance, a new life of more than enough, a new life of serving Yah. We also see that Esther was delivered from the plans and plots of an enemy on the 17th day of Nisan, that whole situation was reversed. On the 17th day of Nisan, they were delivered. And most of all, and most important, on the 17th day of Nisan, Messiah Yahshua was resurrected from the grave when Hasatan thought he had defeated the Son of Yahweh, that he had defeated Yahweh and destroyed his son. On the 17th day of Nisan, Yahshua was delivered from death. And he began his eternal reign, living in a spiritual body, living in immortality on the 17th day of Nisan. And just as the priest would wave the sheaf offering to Yahweh on the 17th day of Nisan for our acceptance, Father Yah accepted on the 17th day of Nisan the blood sacrifice of the Passover lamb Yahshua, and those of us that believe in him, that keep his word and live according to his instructions, are now accepted into the beloved. And this is what took place on the 17th day of Nisan, at least as far as I understand it. These are just a handful of things. And then don't forget about, to me, one of the main things that the Feast of First Fruits is about after all that I just shared. One of the next things has to do with our tithes and offerings. When we give our tithes and offerings, and we give them to Yahshua, our high priest, they are accepted by the Father. And for those that the enemy has deceived into believing that it isn't important or it isn't necessary for you and I to give our tithes and offerings any longer, you are not keeping the fullness of the feast of first fruits, because your tithe is the first fruit of what Yah has blessed you. And I learned almost 40 years ago the importance of tithing and giving offerings. And we learned it at a time in our life when in the natural we couldn't afford it. We were behind in our debts. We were struggling. And the day that the Spirit of Yah quickened us to step out in faith and to trust Yah by giving our 10% to Yeshua, our high priest, through the ministry in which we were part of, all of our bills came even. Previous to that, they were in arrears. I can't explain it. We didn't get an abundance of money coming in. We didn't get no raises. But somehow, some way, Yahweh made a way where there seemed to be no way, that all of our debts became current. And from that day forward, we have continued bringing our tithes and our offerings into the storehouse, the place that Yah has called us to either fellowship or to shepherd. And out of that place, we then give to other people in other ministries. So I would encourage you, don't fall into the trap of deception and traditions of man. See, that's what the Feast of Unleavened Bread is all about. It's about getting out of us the wrong teachings, the teachings that are from man, the teachings and the doctrines that we have received without realizing it, that were not of Yah, that were man-made added teachings. And we need to go back to what thus saith Yahweh. And I know some people disagree with this, that, and the other, but I'm just sharing with you what I believe, what I see in the scriptures, and then it's up to you to research it and step out in faith and either do it or, reject it. So this is what I have on this Shabbat concerning the 17th day of Nisan. All these things play a part of the celebration that we call the Feast of First Fruits, which takes place on the 17th day of Nisan. Now, one thing is not more important than the other. There's just so many things. These are just some of them that I wanted to share with you. And so I pray this information blesses you. I pray this information gives you food for thought. Now, I was reading earlier this week in Romans chapter 10, verses 15 through 17, when the Apostle Paul said, how can they learn unless someone teaches them or preaches to them? How can they learn unless someone is sent to them to teach them? And then he goes into faith comes by hearing, and hearing by Yah's word, or Yah's Torah, or Yah's instructions. So I pray that this would bless you, teach you some things about the 17th day of Nisan, that these historical things that took place on the 17th day of Nisan are just not coincidental. Yeshua did not rise on the 17th day of Nisan and be the first fruits of the resurrection from the dead and the first fruits of immortal life, eternal life. It's just not coincidental that it took place on the 17th day of Nisan. Also, Esther, all that Israel's deliverance in that wasn't coincidental that it took place on the 17th day of Nisan. Israel crossing over the Red Sea and the elimination of their enemy is not coincidental, taking place on the 17th day of Nisan. And Noah's Ark resting on the mountain is not coincidental that it took place on the 17th day of Nisan. So Father, we just thank you for giving us this understanding. We bless you for the 17th day of Nisan, the feast of first fruits. We bless you and we thank you and we just praise you for the fullness of what that feast is to be about in our lives, that our eyes would be open concerning the 17th day of Nisan. So Yahweh, we praise you. Yah, we worship you. Yah, we bless you. And we thank you for your instruction in righteousness. If you want to connect with us, we have a website, YHWH'SAssembly.com. You can connect with us on X. You can connect with us on MeWe, on Facebook. We have a Facebook group. We have a Facebook page called YHWH Assembly. Or you can connect with me, Mark Pulley, on Facebook as well. Until next time, Yahweh bless you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you. Yahweh lift up his countenance or his presence upon you. Yahweh make a way for you where there seems to be no way. And Yah, fill your life with his presence and with his peace by the power of his set apart name. Shalom, shalom.